Hello, this is Sherri Gallagher with Technacon Company Incorporated. This presentation is on ISO 9001-2015, Section 8, Operations. It does not include design. Design has been put together as a separate presentation. Let's start with an overview. When ISO 9001 was first presented in the late 80s, there was the mistaken concept the standard was simply for manufacturers and manufacturing. It was then, and it is now, a management standard and system, and is not limited to manufacturing systems. In the 1980s, the concept was to inspect quality into product. There was one group, operations, responsible for making the product as quickly and cheaply as possible, and another group, quality, were to inspect and prevent too much non-conforming product from reaching the customer. Producing at 97 or 98% conforming product was a company with outstanding quality. Through prevention, planning, and an organizational attitude toward quality, the normal expectation is producing at parts per million defect level, or 99.99964% conforming product. ISO 9001 has always been about reducing costs through preventing nonconformances. Prevention, not detection. The operations section of the ISO 9001-2015 standard is directly related to the production of product or services. The sections or elements of the standard are, this section of the standard are, operational planning and control, requirements for products and services, design, which is not included, control of externally provided processes, products, and services, production and service provision, release of product and services, control of non-conforming output. Operational planning and control is all about planning, implementing, and controlling the process. The planning should be suitable to the organization and its operation. Once again, a small company versus a large multinational company, or a complex product versus a simple one-step process product will implement planning and control very differently. Operational planning is the point where the company identifies the process or processes to produce each product, the requirements of the process, determines the needed resources for the process, implements control of the process, determines, maintains, and retains documented information. This is the answer as to why companies charged with designing the manufacturing process for a product controlled by the customer are not design responsible. This is the point where the company must understand the capability of their process and equipment and determine if they are capable of producing product at the parts per million defect level and any other requirements of the process such as temperature, pressure, etc. If the company is not capable, the organization must determine what resources are needed to make the process capable. The organization must also determine if enough existing resources are available, such as machine time or trained personnel. Is a second or third shift needed? Are there enough trained operators and supervision to add shifts? Resources are both equipment and people. And according to Dr. Deming, people are the most important resource of all. Some level of control is needed in the process, though whether it is first and last piece inspection, a specified method of setup and run parameters, or statistical process control of key performance indicators. Knowing the controls, the organization must establish the documented information collected to provide evidence the process is in control. This includes a record of the measurement devices and software used to accept the product as conforming. The organization must also determine how the documented information will be collected, stored, retrieved, the retention period, and the method of disposal. So here's some examples. An injection molder will place controls on the type, size, and shape of the raw material, and sometimes the size of the press. The molder will track injection pressure and temperature. They may also track external factors such as humidity. Since the product is expected to have a useful life of approximately a year, they will set the minimum retention period for something a little longer, approximately 2 years. Another example is a pharmaceutical company, and they will control the parameters of the batching process and test the effectiveness of those controls prior to sending the material to filling. filled material will again be tested to ensure no contamination occurred in the filling process before sending it to packaging. Packaged material will be warehoused and the location of each batch of material going to each customer will be identified. The product has a very specific expiration date, and records will be kept for the effectiveness period plus an additional period determined by the organization. The performance requirements come from the customer and the organization's own expertise in the product and manufacturing process, as well as statutory and regulatory requirements. An important factor to determine early in the negotiation process is who at the customer has the authority to make decisions. Here is a simple example. A product engineer designed a component part for the equipment being built. Procurement sent the order out to an approved supplier. The approved supplier did not have the necessary manufacturing equipment and contacted procurement to change the drawing so they could manufacture the component part. Procurement approved the change without approaching engineering. The entire order was unusable when it was received because of the approved change. Because procurement gave approval without engineering support, there was a long drawn-out discussion as to whether the supplier would be paid or not, because the correct authorizing authority had not been contacted. Important documents for review when communicating with a customer for requirements are purchase orders, contracts, and drawings. If the customer is supplying a component of the product, the requirements including delivery time and expected quality of the component must be defined. The organization should always have a contingency plan. For example, one of my clients receives a component from their customer and modifies it to create the finished product. The customer is notoriously late or short quantities of raw material. However, when rating my client as a supplier, they give my client a poor rating for on-time delivery and demanded a corrective action. My client was able to demonstrate that 100% of the late deliveries was due to the customer-supplied product. For a corrective action, my client required the customer to keep a stock of material at my client against future orders. As usual, it is up to the organization to know, understand, and comply with applicable regulatory and statutory requirements. The company must meet the claims of these requirements. If the product has a UL or CSA approval, the manufactured product must meet those requirements as well. The last piece of the section is very important. The organization must ensure it has the capability to meet all the requirements, including delivery and post-delivery activities, before accepting the order. Delivery is an important requirement that, according to ISO 9001:2015, must be met. Now let's talk about the control of externally provided processes, products, and services, also known as control of suppliers. In ISO 9001:2015, there's been a slight attitude change when controlling suppliers. In previous editions, auditors looked to see if there was an approved supplier list, how the suppliers were approved, rated, and where necessary, removed from the approved supplier list. There was a discussion early in the process, usually including a review or test of the supplied product. Afterwards, it was the supplier's responsibility to control their process and provide product meeting requirements. The supplier had quite a bit of autonomy to make changes in the process without notifying the customer. However, after several scandals, look up the video on 60 Minutes report on the VOC flooring purchased by lumber liquidators, and the steel scandal in Japan, the organization making the purchase is required to take responsibility for the conformance of requirements of the materials or services they purchase. This includes product shipped directly from the outside supplier to the customer. The organization now needs to approve both the product and the supplier's process and perform validation of the supplying activities from time to time. This can be as simple as taking a coupon of materials and sending it out for analysis and or observing the supplier's process. Moving on to product and service provision. At this point, the organization has defined a process, the requirements of the process, and has raw materials and components meeting requirements. It's time to make product! Yay! The organization should have the necessary documentation to guide the manufacturing process to make consistently conforming product. This can include, but it's not limited to, bills of material, methods of manufacture, job travelers or routing sheets, testing requirements, and documentation. The organization must ensure the necessary monitoring and measuring equipment is available and meets the requirements of Section 7.1.5 Monitoring and Measuring Resources. Adequate infrastructure and work environment must be available, as defined by top management. Competent and qualified personnel must be available. Validation and periodic revalidation of the ability to achieve planned results where product cannot be verified must be done. Identify and eliminate human error. Implement a system to release and deliver product and post-delivery activities. The organization is finally making a product to sell. Now that takes us to identification and traceability. Traceability requirements vary from industry to industry and product to product. In pharmaceuticals, traceability at every step and after sales is critical. In consumer good, usually traceability linked through to bulk packaging is enough. Having part-level traceability can come in handy. I was working for a first-tier automotive supplier. The customer was charging back 1% of sales for non-conforming product returned from the user, but did not require a corrective action. I requested the return of the non-conforming parts, only to find that they were manufactured by a competitor. Having the ability to identify our parts saved our company 1% of sales. ISO 9001:2015 does require the status of all product to be identified at all steps. This can be as simple as a copy of the traveler in each bin, or an identified location for tested material ready to move to the next process, or a login into an ERP system. It is important the organization communicate what these measures are and train to meet them. It is becoming more and more popular to use barcode labels or barcodes on the traveler and use scanners to verify the correct material was utilized. Now let's talk about customer-provided property. You must take care of customer-provided property. Maintain the property according to agreements, store it adequately, and be able to identify it immediately. Customer property should be protected from damage and periodically inspected. The results of the inspection, including any lost or damaged material, must be reported to the customer. The communication with the customer as to this status of property is documented information. Customer property can be equipment such as molds or raw material and components, or intellectual properties or personal data. Think of a medical billing company. Let's talk about preservation of product. Preservation is more than preventing shipping damage, although that is also part of this requirement. As product moves through the system, it must be protected. Steel parts may need to be placed on racks to prevent damage. Computer code needs to be protected from insertions or deletions. Preservation also links back to identification and traceability, as it includes maintaining identification. Even storage must be reviewed. I worked with a company that had a warehouse in a humid environment. The product was stored in corrugated and stacked several boxes high. Of course, product on the bottom of the pile was crushed, and the company had to implement environmental controls in the warehouse. Let's move on to post-delivery activities. This is one of the clauses most frequently deemed not applicable. Still, care should be taken before indicating it is not to be audited. If a helpline exists, this is a post-delivery activity and needs to be included. To determine if post-delivery activities are required, consider the statutory and regulatory requirements, potential undesirable consequences associated with the product or service. In other words, if they can't get to you and it's wired incorrectly or installed by the wrong person, will you burn the building down? The nature and intended lifetime of the product. Marshmallows are used up quickly and no service or installation is required. Customer requirements. After installing new software, there is a learning curve. If there isn't a helpline, what will the customer rating for the product be? Customer feedback. I will never forget the one customer feedback I read. I didn't understand the instructions and dropped a frozen turkey into the deep fryer. You can guess what happened from there. We're coming down to the end, folks. So, control of change. The organization must control and plan for change and the associated risks. This is very similar to planning for change in management. Companies can no longer buy a piece of equipment and see if it's going to create nonconformances without having safeguards to keep those nonconformances from getting to the customer. We must control the change, not have the change control the company. Now let's talk about the release of products and services. Have you ever gotten to the end of a home project only to realize you made a mistake at the beginning and must now disassemble this whole piece of furniture and start over? That is the point of this section of the standard. Product should be tested as it proceeds or processing parameters monitored and reviewed so nonconformances can be caught as early in the process as possible and corrected. The earlier you catch it, the less it costs. In some cases, final testing can take months to complete. The organization must either hold the product for that time period or get permission from a relevant authority or customer. So what would this be? Well, if the product is a concrete foundation, cores will be taken and tested to ensure the foundation can hold the weight of the building. But environmental factors may cause the foundation to cure much more slowly than the test samples. So the idea of it is to get permission to continue with the construction project as the foundation cures so that you don't have to shut down for months or even years before continuing. Again, as usual with the release of product, the organization must keep appropriate documented information. That includes evidence of conformity and traceability to the person authorizing the release. Did you know the frontline supervisor in a pharmaceutical company has a very responsible role? If the supervisor knowingly releases non-conforming product resulting in death, the supervisor can be charged with criminally negligent homicide. Having worn those shoes, I can tell you it's serious. All right, last one, folks. Control of non-conforming outputs. The controls are pretty straightforward. Segregate and identify non-conforming product and prevent it from getting back into the product stream or to the customer. If non-conforming product is detected after delivery, evaluate on-hand product, segregate and identify it, and determine if other customers need to be notified to destroy or return product. Actions to address non-conforming product can be correction. You can rework it, but it must conform to and be verified to the original requirements. You can inform the customer. You can obtain acceptance under concession. But now be careful, if it's something that has an outside certification such as UL or CSA, concession is not an option. Or you can suspend production and figure out how to fix it and destroy what you have. Documented information for non-conforming product must include a description of the nonconformity, the actions taken, any concessions, and the authority deciding the actions in respect to addressing the nonconformity. Well, this was a long one. Keep in mind, for many years this section of the standard was the main section implemented. ISO 9001:2015 was considered is now a management standard. Back in the old days, it was considered a manufacturing standard, even though it has always been a management standard. Section 8, Operations, is the implementation of the standard in general for generating the saleable product of goods or services. It includes planning, defining, controlling, outsourcing processes, and non-conforming product. If you have questions, my email is technacon1986@sbcglobal.net, or you can call me or check out our website, technacon.com. Have a great day.